Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories. I matched with her on a random Thursday night. She had this effortless look in her photos, messy bun, hoodie, small smirk like she didn't care to impress anyone. We talked a bit. Nothing deep, just random jokes and stories about work. She said she didn't have a car and asked if I could pick her up. I didn't think twice about it. It felt casual, like one of those chill first meets that doesn't feel like pressure. I remember her texting, "Hello, it's me, I'll be in all black." That stuck out, but I figured it was just her trying to look simple. I got to her street around 7:30. It was quiet, no one really around except a couple smoking outside a corner shop. Then I saw her walking up from the end of the road. She looked good, but not in that obvious way. Hoodie up, black jeans, bag slung across her chest. She gave a quick wave and hopped in. She had this calm vibe, like she'd done this 100 times before. When she got in, I noticed she glanced around my car a bit too much, like she was checking something. Still, I brushed it off. We were heading to this small Italian place downtown. I had music low trying to make small talk, but she kept glancing behind us every few minutes. I made a joke like, "You good? You look like you're expecting paparazzi or something," but she just laughed it off, eyes still darting to the rear mirror. I told myself she was just nervous. First dates can make anyone weird. Halfway there, she asked me to take a longer route. She said the main road had too much traffic. I didn't think much of it, so I followed her directions. We ended up driving past some warehouses near the edge of the city. She looked out the window the whole time, quiet, barely moving. I remember thinking she didn't even seem interested in dinner anymore. I was debating whether to just drop her off, but she suddenly smiled and said, "We're close now. Turn left up ahead." We parked in front of the restaurant, this small, kind of fancy place with a glowing red sign. As I was about to unbuckle my seatbelt, I noticed flashing blue lights in my side mirror. I thought maybe a car accident happened behind us. Then suddenly, two police cars pulled up fast, blocking both ends of the street. Before I could even process it, 4 officers were out, yelling for me to turn the car off and keep my hands visible. My heart just froze. I turned to her and she didn't even look surprised. She just sighed, muttered something under her breath, and placed her hands on the dashboard like she'd done this before. I couldn't move. One of the officers shouted for me to open the door slowly. I did, shaking like hell. Next thing I know, I'm being pulled out, slammed against my car, and cuffed. I kept yelling that I didn't do anything, that I didn't even know what was happening. They weren't listening. They separated us immediately. I saw them drag her out, and she just stared at me, completely calm, like this wasn't chaos. She didn't say anything, didn't even try to explain. The officer next to me was talking into his radio, mentioning something about the black Honda spotted near the robbery site. My brain couldn't even process it. Robbery. What robbery? After about 10 minutes, things started to piece together. The cops told me my car matched one used as a getaway vehicle in an armed robbery 2 nights ago. I was confused out of my mind, trying to explain that I'd never been near anything like that. I kept saying I didn't even know her last name. One officer leaned in and said, "You're saying that now, but we'll see what your passenger has to say." When they opened her bag, that's when everything shifted. Inside were gloves, 2 phones, and a stack of plates, license plates. My jaw just dropped. She didn't flinch. She stood there like it was nothing, like she'd already accepted this moment days ago. They questioned her, asked if the car was hers. She said no. Then one of the cops came over to me, face hard, and asked how I knew her. I told him I met her on Tinder, that I just picked her up 30 minutes ago. He didn't believe me at first. It took them running both our names for the truth to click. I was clean. She wasn't. Turns out she'd been involved in multiple robberies as the driver, always managing to escape before anyone got caught. They'd been tracking stolen cars in the area, and one of her last jobs involved a black Honda. Mine. That's why they swarmed us. They thought I was part of her crew. They put her in the back of one of the police cars. She looked out the window straight at me, this tiny smirk on her face. It wasn't cocky. It was more like she knew she'd ruined my night and didn't care. They found messages on one of her phones about another job that was supposed to happen that night. Apparently, I'd picked her up right before she was planning to use my car for it. I was literally minutes away from being unknowingly involved in a full armed robbery. After an hour of questioning, it let me go. They kept my car for evidence though, so I had to get an Uber home. Sitting in the back of that Uber, I kept replaying everything. Her glancing behind us. Her asking me to take the longer route. The all-black outfit. Every little thing suddenly made sense, and it made me sick thinking about how close I was to being in serious trouble for something I didn't even know about. The weirdest part is that she never said a single word to defend herself. No yelling, no crying, no trying to run. Just silence, like she'd already accepted what was coming. Later that week, I saw her face pop up in a local news post online. Arrest made in string of getaway robberies. There she was, saying photo from her dating profile. Same smirk. My car came back a month later, full of fingerprint dust and that smell of police cleaner. I couldn't even sit in it without thinking about that night, about how easily my name could have been tied to something I had nothing to do with. I deleted the app right after that. I still drive past that restaurant sometimes. Every time I see that red glow from the sign, I remember the flash of blue lights reflecting off my windshield and how my stomach dropped when I realized the person I was trying to impress was the reason cops had guns pointed at me. You never really think something like that can happen until you're standing in the middle of the street, hands cuffed, and realizing your date's the one they've been hunting for. I matched with him on a Wednesday afternoon when I was sitting at work pretending to be productive. His profile was normal funny captions, some pictures with his dog, and one where he was wearing a suit that looked like a wedding. He looked put together, and honestly, I hadn't been on a decent date in months. So when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I said yeah. He suggested this restaurant downtown that I'd heard people at work mention before. Kind of fancy, but not too much. He showed up before me, which caught me off guard because most guys I'd met were always late. When I walked in, he stood up from the booth and waved. He looked exactly like his pictures, even better actually. Confident, but not arrogant. We sat down, ordered drinks, and everything just flowed. He was charming in that calm, natural way that doesn't feel forced. He told me he worked in logistics, whatever that meant, and that he had a 7-year-old son who lived with his mom most of the time. I didn't pry too much because he didn't sound bitter about it. The restaurant was warm, low lighting, kind of busy, but not too loud. I remember thinking the whole night had a weirdly calm vibe. He kept checking his phone every once in a while, though. Like every few minutes. I noticed it but didn't want to seem like I was judging. He told me his kid was with his mom that day, so I figured maybe he was just making sure everything was fine. We ordered pasta and talked about random stuff. He was funny, easy to talk to, not weird like most guys. But halfway through eating, I noticed this tension start to build in him. His legs started bouncing under the table, his eyes kept darting toward the front of the restaurant. I asked if everything was okay, and he gave me this nervous laugh, saying something about work emails stressing him out. About 10 minutes later, everything went from normal to straight chaos. The front door flew open and this woman stormed in, screaming his name so loud that the whole place went silent. Behind her, 2 police officers came rushing in. I just froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. Everyone in the restaurant turned to stare. He went pale, like all the life drained out of him. The woman pointed right at him, yelling that he took her child. My mind couldn't even process it. I thought maybe she was mistaken, like maybe this was some kind of crazy misunderstanding. But then I saw his reaction. He didn't even argue. He just put his head down into his hands. The officers moved in fast, shouting commands, and before I could even blink, he was standing with his hands behind his back, getting cuffed right there next to our table. The woman kept yelling that he had their son in his car. My stomach dropped. I turned toward the window and saw a small kid sitting in the back seat of his black SUV parked outside. The kid looked scared, staring straight ahead. One of the officers ran outside, opened the car door, and pulled the boy out carefully. The woman ran after them crying, hugging the kid, and that's when everything hit me. He'd shown me pictures of his son on his phone earlier, same kid. He told me his mom had him that day. But clearly that wasn't true. I couldn't move. The whole restaurant just sat there in stunned silence while the cops read him his rights. People were whispering, recording, trying to act like they weren't. I felt like I was in some weird movie, except I was the idiot sitting at the table with the guy being arrested for kidnapping. They escorted him out, and he didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. Just kept his eyes on the floor as they walked him out in handcuffs. The cops and the woman followed, leaving behind this heavy quietness that no one knew how to break. The waiter came over and asked softly if I was okay. I didn't even know how to answer. I just mumbled that I was fine and asked for the bill even though I'd barely eaten half my food. My hands were shaking so much I could barely pull my card out. I ended up just leaving cash on the table and walking out. Outside, there were flashing lights, a few more patrol cars, and people standing around watching. They were searching his car, pulling things out from the back seat. I saw a small backpack, some toys, and a duffel bag that looked like it was full of clothes. It laid everything out on the hood while one officer took photos. It didn't look like he planned on returning the kid anytime soon. I stood there watching for a few seconds before the woman turned and saw me. Her face went from anger to confusion. She walked over, still holding her son, and asked who I was. I told her quietly that I was just someone he'd met online and that I had no idea about any of this. She just stared at me for a second, then nodded like she almost felt sorry for me. The officers started taking statements, so I gave mine. I told them everything, from when I met him online to the drive to the restaurant. They were polite but firm, asked if he'd mentioned the kid or anything about where they'd been earlier. I told them about him saying the boy was with his mom and how he'd seemed anxious during dinner. One of the officers nodded, writing everything down. Apparently, the woman had full custody, and earlier that day, he'd shown up at the school pretending to pick his son up for a routine visit. Then he just never brought him back. She'd been calling the police all day, and they'd been tracking his phone. They finally found his location at the restaurant because he had his GPS on. When they were done questioning me, I just stood there watching them put him in the back of the patrol car. His head was down, eyes blank. He looked nothing like the calm, confident guy I had met 2 hours earlier. The car pulled away, and I could see the kid sitting in another officer's car with his mom trying to calm him down. The whole ride home, I couldn't stop replaying everything. The little things that didn't make sense. The constant phone checking, the way he kept glancing toward the door, the nervous leg bouncing. He wasn't worried about work. He was terrified of getting caught. I got home, sat on my bed, and just stared at my phone. His messages were still there. The one he sent before I left saying he was excited to meet me. I deleted the app that night. I didn't even tell anyone about it for days because I didn't know how to explain something like that without sounding crazy. A week later, a local news article popped up about a man arrested for kidnapping his son from school. His face was right there on the front page. The same smile, same suit, same confident look. It said he planned to leave the country with the boy. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. It's weird to think how close I was to someone like that, sitting across from him, laughing, eating pasta, having no clue what kind of mess was happening outside that restaurant. It started out like any regular Friday night date. I'd been talking to this girl Mia for a couple weeks online. She was funny, chill, not too serious. She had this kind of easy energy that made it feel like I already knew her. We agreed to grab dinner at a burger place near the waterfront. I got there early to get parking, and when she walked up, she looked exactly like her pictures, which honestly felt like a small miracle. We went inside, but she immediately said she'd rather sit outdoors. I didn't mind at first. It was warm out, not windy, and they had these little heaters on the patio anyway. She seemed almost too set on sitting outside, though, like she'd thought about it before even getting there. We picked a table facing the street, with cars and people passing every few minutes. She kept adjusting her chair, making sure she was facing toward the road. I tried to keep the conversation going, stuff about hobbies, travel, basic first date talk, but she kept glancing past me. Every couple of minutes her eyes flicked toward something behind me. Eventually I turned a bit and saw what she'd been looking at. A white van parked across the street. I noticed 2 men sitting inside, not doing anything, just sitting. One had a baseball cap pulled low. The other was leaning over something that looked like a laptop or a small screen. It was weird, but not completely out of place. I figured maybe they were delivery guys on break or something. She saw me glance over and said quickly that she just liked sitting outdoors for the fresh air. It sounded forced, though, like she was covering something up. We ordered food, and I tried to act normal. She was calm, but there was this stiffness to her, like she was trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. Halfway through eating, she started asking me weirdly specific questions. Stuff like if I live alone, if I had roommates, how often I travel for work. I brushed them off, gave vague answers. It wasn't like she was flirting. It felt more like she was filling a form in her head. When I looked back at the van again, the men were still there. One of them was on the phone. Another car pulled up behind them, unmarked but with tinted windows. I got this uneasy feeling like we were being watched. I told myself I was just overthinking it, but every time she looked toward that van, her expression changed for a second. Her face went blank, almost tense, then she'd smile at me again like she flicked a switch. The waiter came out with our food, and I barely touched mine. She picked at her fries while scrolling on her phone, looking distracted. The van's headlights flashed twice. She looked up at it instantly, like it was a signal. That's when my stomach dropped. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. A few minutes later, she asked if I could walk her to her car after we finished. I said sure, even though now I wasn't so sure I wanted to. She was acting strange, and I couldn't tell if I was in danger or if she was. The van door slid open slightly, and one of the men stepped out, pretending to smoke. He wasn't even watching traffic. His eyes were on us. Then, out of nowhere, police cars appeared at both ends of the street. Lights flashing, blocking traffic. The whole restaurant patio turned their heads to look. 2 officers jumped out and surrounded the van. People started whispering, pulling out their phones. The guy from the van tried to run, but he didn't make it 2 steps before one of the officers tackled him. I looked at Mia, and she wasn't surprised at all. She just sat there, staring down at the table, her hand shaking slightly. One officer came over and said something to her quietly. She nodded, stood up, and followed him. I called after her, asking what was going on, but the officer just told me to stay seated. It turned out the entire thing had been a sting operation. The van was part of a surveillance team that had been monitoring an ongoing trafficking network. Mia wasn't just some random girl I matched with. She was working with the police's bait. They'd been using her to lure in a suspect connected to the operation, but apparently they hadn't expected me to show up instead. They pulled me aside, asked for my ID, checked my car, and questioned me for almost an hour. I told them everything, from how we met to how she insisted on sitting outside. One officer said they were tracking a specific group that approached women online and tried to recruit them. She volunteered to help after escaping from the same group months ago. She wasn't a cop, but she worked with them now. They'd been watching her because they thought someone from the group was going to make contact that night. When I showed up, they realized it was just a normal date, but the guys in the van across the street weren't normal. They were suspects waiting to grab her once she was alone. That's why she wanted to sit outside. She knew they'd come, and she needed them to make a move where police could see it. The officers arrested 3 men total that night. They said the sting had been planned for weeks, but things had moved faster than expected when the suspect spotted her online again. I remember just standing there in the middle of the street, surrounded by flashing lights, feeling completely out of place. People from the restaurant were staring, whispering, probably thinking I was part of it. When they finally let me go, I asked one of the officers what would happen to her. He said she'd be taken somewhere safe, that she couldn't go back to her normal life yet. She'd been helping them for a while, using dating apps to catch men who trafficked or recruited young women. I just stood there in silence, processing the fact that my date was part of an undercover operation without me even knowing. I got in my car, but I didn't start it right away. I looked across the street where the van had been parked. The spot was empty now, just a dark patch of road under a flickering streetlight. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare by accident. When I got home, I checked my phone. Her profile was gone, deleted completely. All our chats, pictures, everything wiped. It was like she never existed. I kept replaying the whole night in my head, the way she glanced toward the van, the flashing headlights, the calm in her voice even when the police showed up. None of it had been random. Every time I walk by that restaurant now, I can't help looking across the street. Part of me still expects to see that white van parked there, engine running, lights off, 2 men inside waiting for someone to make the wrong move. It started as one of those dates that felt almost too easy. I'd matched with her a week before, and everything just clicked fast. We joked around, texted late, talked about dumb things like what kind of pizza toppings were criminal. She picked a restaurant downtown that I'd never been to before, kind of classy but not ridiculously expensive. I got there early, wearing the jacket I always wear when I actually care about how I look. She walked in a few minutes later, smiled, and waved like she already knew me. She looked even better in person, bright eyes, confident walk, like she'd done this a million times but still cared enough to show up. The vibe was good from the start. We talked about random stuff, where we live, work, small stories about family. She was one of those people who makes conversation easy, like you're already in on a secret together. The restaurant had this dim lighting with soft music in the background, candles flickering on every table. It was calm, warm, kind of perfect for a first date. Everything was smooth until the end. That's when it started getting strange. When the waiter brought the bill, I didn't even think twice about paying. I pulled out my wallet and handed over my card. It wasn't a big deal. I'd been paid that week. The waiter came back after a minute, smiling awkwardly, and said the card didn't go through. I laughed it off, thinking it was one of those chip reader things that just glitch sometimes. He tried again. Still declined. Now she's watching me, kind of confused, and I'm starting to sweat. I tried another card. Same thing, declined. I pulled out my phone to check my bank app, but it logged me out, saying my account couldn't be verified. That's when something in my stomach started turning. The waiter offered to give us a few minutes. I apologized to her, trying to keep it light. She said it was fine, but her tone shifted slightly, like she wasn't sure if I was lying or broke. I started digging through my wallet, trying to find cash, but that's when I noticed something off. My driver's license looked weird. It wasn't the same texture, like the plastic was thinner. Even the photo looked slightly different, same picture but off, like it had been reprinted. Before I could process that, I noticed two guys in suits walk into the restaurant. Not regular suits, black suits, badges on their belts. They talked quietly to the hostess, who instantly went pale. One of them pointed toward our table. The restaurant door is locked. Literally locked. A waiter walked up and quietly told everyone to stay seated. People were whispering, confused. I turned to her and her face had completely drained of color. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring past me toward the men walking in. They came straight over. One of them asked my name, calm but serious. I told him, and he looked at the ID in my hand, then back at me. He told me to put my hands on the table. Everyone was watching now. I tried to explain that there had to be some mistake, that my card just wasn't working. They asked where I got my ID and wallet. I told them I'd had it for years. They exchanged a look, then one of them pulled out a small photo from his pocket and laid it on the table. It was a copy of my license, but not me. Same name, same birthday, different guy. That's when I realized what was happening. My entire identity had been cloned. They said my ID number and bank accounts were part of a stolen identity investigation that had been going on for months. Someone had been using my information to move money, open credit lines, and even apply for jobs. I sat there frozen while one of them scanned the card with some portable device. He said it wasn't legitimate. It was a duplicate. They started asking me about her, how long I'd known her, where I met her, if she'd ever asked me for personal details. I told them it was our first date. I barely knew her. But when I turned to her, she looked completely different, cold, distant, almost guilty. One officer said quietly that they'd been tracking her for weeks. She was the main suspect in a ring that specialized in cloning IDs and bank accounts using stolen data from dating apps. I couldn't even speak. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, staring down her hands. The officer explained that the restaurant had been used before as a meeting spot for people involved in these scams, and tonight it set up surveillance. They hadn't expected me to be the one sitting across from her. I'd walked straight into an active sting without even realizing it. When they stood her up to cuff her, she finally looked at me. Not angry or scared, just disappointed, like she didn't mean for it to happen like this. They took her away quietly. The whole restaurant stayed dead silent, forks midair, no one daring to say a word. After they left, one of the officers stayed behind to talk to me. He told me they'd have to keep my wallet for evidence. They needed to run fingerprints and confirm which items were real and which were fake. He said they'd help me contact the banks to secure my accounts. I just nodded, still trying to catch up to what had just happened. When I got home that night, I called the number they gave me and confirmed it all. Every card, every account, even my ID number, it was all cloned. Someone had built a full fake version of me and had been using it for months. The officer said they traced it back to a small group that met people online, copied their personal info through data scraping, and used fake relationships to pull more details. She was one of the top people in it. I barely slept. My head wouldn't stop replaying how casual everything had seemed, the way she laughed, how normal she acted, how easily she looked me in the eyes while knowing exactly what she was doing. The next morning, I read her name on a local crime report. They'd arrested 3 others connected to her, found fake IDs, cloned cards, and thousands in stolen funds. My name was listed in the article as one of the victims. I got my identity sorted eventually, but it took months. Every time I open my wallet now, I double-check everything. Same with every text or message from someone new. I don't trust dates that go too smoothly anymore. I still drive by that restaurant sometimes, and every time I see someone laughing over dinner on the patio, I wonder if one of them is real or if someone else is sitting across from a fake. It started with her message saying she knew a place that wasn't on Google Maps. That alone should have been weird enough for me to say no, but she said it was one of those secret bars that only locals knew about. The way she described it made it sound cool, like an underground hangout with good music and cheap drinks. I didn't even think twice. We met up outside a noodle shop downtown, the kind that always smells amazing but never looks open. She waved, smiling big, and told me to follow her around the side of the building. We went through this narrow alleyway covered in graffiti. She stopped at a steel door with no sign, knocked twice, then pushed it open. Inside was this dim stairwell leading down, lit by red bulbs. I joked about how it looked like a horror movie set, but she just laughed and told me to relax. I followed her down, a sound of music getting louder as we went deeper underground. At the bottom, the place looked like an actual bar, but smaller. Brick walls, a few tables, a bar counter, people drinking and laughing. It wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. The air smelled like smoke and strong alcohol. She waved at the bartender like she knew him, and he gave her a nod. We sat near the back, close to a wall that had these strange panels running across it, like dark glass. We ordered drinks, and at first everything was normal. The people around us were chatting, the lighting was low. Some guy was playing music on an old speaker setup. She seemed relaxed, but her eyes kept flicking toward the bar every few minutes. I noticed that most of the people there weren't really drinking much. They were just sitting, looking at their phones, or watching the bartender. It felt off, like everyone knew something I didn't. I started paying more attention to the walls. Those dark glass panels weren't just decoration. When I leaned a bit, I saw the faint outline of a lens behind one. Cameras, lined across the entire wall. And not small ones either. These were mounted professional setups. My stomach twisted a little. It didn't make sense. Who needs cameras facing the crowd in a place like this? I told myself it was maybe some artsy security setup, but then I saw a small red light blink on in one of them. Then another. That's when it clicked. They were recording. She caught me looking and smiled awkwardly, like she knew I noticed. Before I could ask anything, the bartender hit a switch, and a dim blue light spread across the room. Everyone went quiet. A projector on the far wall turned on, showing a live chat feed filled with usernames and emojis. It looked like some kind of live stream. My head was spinning trying to figure out what was happening. A few people at the tables turned their phones around, and I saw the same chat feed on their screens. The usernames were typing fast, sending money icons and random comments. Then I realized what was going on. The cameras weren't for security, they were streaming us. Everyone inside was part of it. I whispered to her asking what this was, but she didn't answer. She just sat there still, hands on her lap, staring straight ahead. That's when I noticed another camera directly above our table, angled right down at us. The chat on the projector started spamming something in all caps. Anywho guy. They were talking about me. Someone must have recognized I wasn't part of whatever was happening. I wanted to leave, but when I stood up, the bartender called out for everyone to stay seated. 2 guys near the door shifted like security guards, blocking the exit. I felt my chest tighten. She leaned in close and said softly that I needed to stay calm, that it would be over soon. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. My brain was racing, trying to piece together what kind of place this even was. The projection changed again. This time it showed multiple camera angles, different rooms, different tables, even a few people standing near microphones. Each angle had donation counters and usernames flooding the screen. It wasn't a normal live stream. It was organized, structured, almost like some twisted show. The chat kept requesting things, sending large amounts of money for reactions or scenes. Then the front door slammed open. The music cut instantly. A loud voice shouted for everyone to get down. Police. Within seconds, a whole room erupted in chaos. People were diving under tables. The bartender tried to run but got pinned immediately. Officers swarmed the room yelling commands, pulling cords out of the walls, and cutting the lights. Someone pulled me up by the shoulder, but when they saw I was just some random guy with wide eyes and no clue what was happening, they pushed me toward the exit. Outside, there were at least 5 unmarked cars, flashing lights, and people lined up in handcuffs. Turns out the place wasn't a bar at all. It was an illegal live streaming den. They were running hidden streams across multiple platforms, recording customers without consent, and taking money from anonymous viewers who paid to watch real people in real settings. Some streams were harmless, just people drinking, but others got darker the longer you looked. They questioned me for 2 hours. They wanted to know how I found the place, who brought me there, and whether I'd been there before. I told them everything. How I met her online, how she let me there, how she seemed to know the bartender. They told me they'd been tracking the operation for weeks. She wasn't just some random girl either. She'd been working with them as part of the setup, bringing in new people to make it look like a real bar to keep the streams fresh and believable. They showed me stills from the cameras. There I was sitting across from her, smiling like an idiot while thousands of people watched. The officer said the viewers had paid hundreds just to watch the night unfold. I didn't even want to think about what happened in those other rooms. They let me go, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. She hadn't said a word when the police came in. They told me she'd been arrested too, that she was part of the ring. She used dating apps to lure in people who wouldn't ask questions, who would follow her anywhere just to impress her. For weeks after, I kept seeing flashes of red lights in the corner of my eye. Every time I went out somewhere new, I looked for cameras. The thought that strangers had watched me in real time, laughing, sending money, commenting, it stuck in my head like a bad song that wouldn't stop looping. I haven't been on a date since. Sometimes when I'm scrolling online late at night, I'll see random clips posted anonymously, blurry videos of people in restaurants or bars. And I always wonder if one of them is from that night, if somewhere out there, there's still a video of me sitting in that basement, not knowing I was already part of the show. I met her on a Sunday night when I was half asleep scrolling through my phone. Her profile wasn't trying too hard. She had simple pictures, one at a coffee shop, one with her dog, and one that looked like it was taken in a park. She looked normal, approachable, not like the usual filtered chaos you see online. We talked for a few days, and she came across really grounded. She said she was tired of games and wanted something real. I'd heard that before, but something about the way she said it felt believable. We agreed to meet at this quiet Italian place downtown. Not too fancy, not cheap either. The kind of place where the lights are warm and they bring you water before you even ask. She arrived 5 minutes late, but I didn't care. She walked in wearing a dark green dress, hair tied back, and this calm smile that looked rehearsed but still charming. I remember thinking she looked like the type of person who had everything together. The date started great. She was funny, confident, asked good questions, didn't overshare. It felt easy. She talked about working in marketing and how she just moved to the city a few months ago. I believed every word. We ordered pasta and wine, and I remember feeling like this was one of those rare good matches. Nothing awkward, no weird silence, no red flags. Halfway through, just as the food came, I noticed this guy at the entrance. He looked out of breath, like he'd been running. He had a small box in his hand, and he was scanning the tables like he was looking for someone. The whole restaurant turned quiet for a second, because everyone thought it was some kind of surprise proposal about to happen. Then he walked straight toward our table. I thought he was lost at first, maybe confusing her for someone else. But then he dropped to one knee right beside us. He opened the box, and there was a ring inside. A real one, big and shining under the restaurant light. He looked up at her and called her by a different name. Not hers, at least not the one she told me. For a second, I actually laughed because I thought it had to be a prank, but her face froze completely. Her hands went still on the table. She didn't even blink. The guy kept talking, emotional, saying how he'd been looking for her for weeks, how she'd blocked him after taking everything they built together. His voice cracked halfway through, and the restaurant just sat in silence, every fork paused midair. Then she stood up, shaking, and said it wasn't her, that he must have been mistaken. But the way she said it didn't sound sure. Her voice cracked slightly. The guy wasn't buying it. He started pulling out his phone, showing pictures of her. Same face, same hair, same exact woman sitting right in front of me. The waiter came over, confused, trying to calm them down. People started whispering at nearby tables. She kept denying everything, saying she didn't know him. But the more she spoke, the more the guy's face fell, like he realized he wasn't crazy. He said her name again, louder this time, and that's when it happened. Police walked through the door. 2 of them. No sirens, no shouting, just quiet authority. They looked around the restaurant and then went straight to our table like they already knew exactly where she was. One of them said her real name, the same one the guy had used. She froze completely. The officer told her to stay seated, but she didn't. She tried to walk out fast, grabbing her bag from the chair. The other officer blocked her. Then everything moved quick. They told her she was being detained for questioning in connection to multiple romance fraud cases. I remember the exact words because they didn't sound real at first. People started recording. I just sat there like an idiot, still holding my fork, watching the person I thought I was on a first date with being cuffed right beside me. She didn't argue anymore, didn't cry or yell, just kept her head down. They walked her out quietly while the guy who proposed stood there looking crushed, holding the ring box open like he didn't know what else to do with it. After they left, the whole restaurant started buzzing with whispers. The waiter came over slowly and asked if I wanted to settle the bill. I barely heard him. My brain was just looping through the last 30 minutes like a bad dream. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what just happened, so I searched her name. It didn't take long to find her. There were local articles already, something about a group of people running long-term romance scams targeting older men and professionals. She wasn't just part of it. She was one of the main ones. Apparently, she used fake names and fake jobs, meeting people online and building relationships for months before convincing them to send money for emergencies or fake investments. The guy at the restaurant wasn't just some random ex. He was one of the people she'd scammed. He'd gone to the police after realizing what happened, and they tracked her down using location data from their messages. She must have set up the date with me thinking it was safe, not realizing they were already following her. I sat there scrolling through the articles, reading her name over and over. Seeing her mugshot messed me up. She didn't look evil or anything, just normal. Same calm expression she had at dinner, like she'd done this before. The weirdest part was how well she played it. She looked me straight in the eye for 2 hours, laughing, asking about my family, pretending like we were 2 normal people getting to know each other. I had no idea I was just filler for the night. Maybe she thought she could start over. Maybe she was just killing time before leaving town again. For days after, I kept checking the local news. It said she was connected to at least 6 different fake identities, and there might be more people involved. The guy who proposed apparently lost a huge amount of money to her. Thousands. He planned to propose before she disappeared. Finding her again must have felt like getting closure until the cops showed up. It's been months, but I still remember every detail. The way she smiled when she walked in, how the whole restaurant gasped when the guy kneeled, and how fast everything fell apart after that. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering if any part of her that night was real, if even a single thing she said to me wasn't just part of the act. Dating's weird enough already, but that night made me realize how easily people can fake entire lives online. You can talk to someone for weeks, think you know them, and then find out they're not even who they say they are. I deleted every app after that. Haven't touched them since. Every now and then, I still get random friend requests from new accounts that look a little too polished, a little too familiar. I always wonder if one of them might be her again, under a new name, trying the same thing somewhere else. I met her on a random weekday night. She wasn't like most of the girls I usually matched with. Her profile looked expensive, photos in nice restaurants, fancy clothes, city rooftops at night. I joked about how she probably only dated guys who drove sports cars, but she replied saying she was actually just into chill people. We started talking every day after that. She was funny, kind of sarcastic, but never dry. It felt weirdly easy. She asked if I wanted to grab a drink that weekend. I said sure, and that's when she said she'd already booked a lounge inside this luxury hotel near the river. I thought it was a bit much for a first date, but she said she liked quiet spots where she could actually talk. I figured, why not? When I got there, the hotel looked like something out of a movie. Huge glass doors, polished floors, and a lobby that smelled like expensive perfume. The lounge was upstairs, dimly lit with gold lights and soft jazz playing in the background. She was already there when I walked in, sitting by the window with a glass of wine. She waved me over with this calm confidence that made it feel like she'd been here 100 times. We ordered drinks, and honestly, the vibe was great. She looked perfect. Simple black dress, hair tied neatly, just enough confidence to seem in control of the whole night. We talked for over an hour. She told me she'd been traveling for work, staying at this hotel for the week, and that she loved city views. Every answer she gave sounded polished, like she'd read a script. I started noticing little things, though. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd flip it upside down and keep talking like nothing happened. When the waiter came around, she avoided eye contact. She also kept looking toward the elevators every few minutes. Not nervous, just alert, like she was waiting for someone. Halfway through the second drink, a staff member walked by and whispered something to the bartender. The bartender froze for a second, then looked right at her. She didn't notice at first. I did. The whole energy of the room shifted slightly, like everyone was pretending not to pay attention but still watching. A few minutes later, a manager walked in. He was dressed sharp, earpiece in, scanning the room. He stopped at our table. My first thought was that maybe we'd done something wrong, like maybe she forgot to pay for the drinks earlier or something. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at her. He said something quietly, too low for me to hear. Her face changed instantly. The calm confidence she had all night cracked just a bit. She asked what the problem was, but her tone came out uneven. The manager signaled to someone behind him. That's when 2 hotel security guards approached. People nearby started whispering, and I could feel the tension climbing fast. She looked at me, trying to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said it was probably a misunderstanding and that she'd handle it. Then the manager placed a small folder on the table and told her they needed to verify the payment method used to book her suite. She went completely still. They asked to see her ID and the card she used for the reservation. She pulled out a black card and handed it over, still trying to play it cool. The manager looked at it, then nodded to the security guard. That's when I realized something serious was going on. One of the guards quietly spoke into his radio. Seconds later, a few police officers came through the lobby entrance. No sirens, no shouting, just controlled silence. They walked straight toward us. The whole lounge went dead quiet. I could hear the soft clinking of glasses from the bar and the faint hum of the music still playing like nothing was happening. The officers stopped at our table and asked for her by name, but not the one she told me, a completely different name. She froze, then laughed nervously, saying they had the wrong person. The officer repeated the name again, this time firmer, and showed her a photo on his phone. She didn't even look at it. She just looked down at her drink, like she knew there was no point. Then they told her the card she used to rent the suite upstairs was flagged that morning. It belonged to a man found dead in another part of the city. A murder victim. The hotel had been alerted hours ago when the card was reported in an active investigation. They'd been waiting for confirmation before moving in. My mind just blanked out. I sat there frozen while she stood up slowly, hands shaking, trying to say it wasn't her. But the police weren't arguing. They cuffed her right there beside me. People started recording on their phones. The manager apologized quietly to the other guests while the officers escorted her out. As she walked past me, she looked back once. Not angry, not sad, just this weird blank expression like she was done pretending. After they left, I sat there in silence, not even sure if I was supposed to pay the bill or leave. The manager came over and said I wasn't in trouble, that they'd need to take a statement. They moved me to a corner booth away from everyone and asked a bunch of questions. How I met her, what I knew about her, if she ever mentioned where she worked or lived. I told them everything. One of the officers came back later and explained the rest. She'd been under investigation for weeks. Apparently, she'd been using stolen identities and cards from wealthy victims across different cities. The man whose card she used this time wasn't just robbed. He'd been murdered 2 nights earlier. They were still trying to figure out how she got his information. They showed me photos of some of her aliases, and she looked different in every single one. Different hair colors, names, even jobs. She was a full chameleon. The officer said she used dating apps to meet people, often picking places like high-end lounges or hotels to blend in. It was part of the act, to look like she belonged somewhere expensive. When I finally left the hotel that night, the city felt colder than usual. I walked to my car trying to process what had just happened. I kept replaying everything. How normal she'd seemed, how confident, how easily she talked about her career and travels. She probably didn't even have a real job. Everything about her was built on lies. The next morning, I read the story online. Her arrest made local headlines. Woman arrested in connection to high-profile identity theft linked to homicide. Seeing her photo there, looking calm in the mugshot, hit different. She didn't even look scared, just detached, like it was routine. Every time I pass that hotel now, I still picture her sitting in that chair by the window, glass of wine in hand, pretending to be someone she wasn't. It's crazy how close you can sit next to something dark and have no clue until it's too late. I thought I was being creative when I came up with the idea. Everyone goes for drinks or dinner, but I wanted something simple, something that actually felt real. A beach bonfire sounded perfect. Quiet, private, easy to talk without noise or awkward crowds. I'd been talking to this girl for about 2 weeks. She said she liked calm nights and hated clubs, so this felt like the perfect plan. It was early evening when I got there. The sun was starting to drop behind the water, turning everything gold and orange. I parked by the side road, grabbed a few snacks, some cheap wine, and an old blanket from my trunk. I walked down the sand until I found a good spot near some rocks, not too close to anyone else. The air smelled salty and fresh, and I felt weirdly proud of how chill it all looked. There was a bunch of wood scattered near the shoreline, washed up from the tide. Some of it looked solid, smooth enough to burn. I gathered what I could, stacked it up in a circle of stones, and waited. She texted that she was almost there, so I started setting up the fire. I crouched down, lit it up, and it caught fast. The flames spread across the wood, crackling and glowing bright in the fading light. I remember thinking it looked perfect. Warm, quiet, peaceful. Then she arrived. Hair blowing in the wind, laughing, holding her shoes in one hand because she didn't want to ruin them in the sand. We sat down by the fire, talked about dumb stuff like music and old school stories, and just watched the waves. It felt good, like an actual date, not forced. The light from the fire flickered across her face, and everything felt almost cinematic. But maybe 10 minutes later, I noticed something weird about the fire. There was this sharp smell coming from it. Not just burning wood, something chemical, almost like melted plastic mixed with something sour. I thought maybe the wood had tar on it from a dock or something, so I tossed another piece on top to keep it burning clean. It didn't help. The smell got worse thicker. She noticed it too and covered her mouth a little, laughing but uncomfortable. I told her it was probably from the seawater drying off the wood. But when the wind shifted, the smoke hit us full on, and I started to feel my stomach turn. It wasn't just bad, it was disgusting, like burnt hair and rubber mixed together. I got up and kicked a few logs over to spread the fire out, but as I did, I saw something strange. One of the pieces of wood didn't look like the others. It was darker, softer in texture, not like wood at all. When the flames hit it, it cracked, but not like driftwood. It broke unevenly. I stared at it for a second too long, trying to figure out what I was even looking at. Then, faintly in the distance, I heard sirens. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It's a city beach. You always hear noise. But they were getting closer. Fast. I looked over toward the parking lot, and there were flashing lights coming down the access road. More than one. She looked at me, confused, asking if something was wrong, but I didn't have an answer. The siren stopped suddenly near the edge of the beach, and I saw 2 police cars and a rescue truck. Officers started walking down toward the shoreline, flashlights cutting through the sand. They weren't looking for us at first. They were scanning the waterline. Then one of them pointed toward the direction of our fire. A few others followed his light. I froze completely. They were heading straight for us. They got close and told us to step back from the fire. I did, completely lost, still trying to figure out what was going on. One officer looked at the wood pile, then called over to another. He said something low into his radio, and suddenly it got tense. They started roping off the area with tape, moving us back further. I heard one of them say something about boat wreckage and possible evidence. My chest sank. Another officer turned to me and asked where I'd gotten the wood. I pointed toward the rocks and said it was just driftwood from the shore. He looked at me like I'd said something insane. He explained, calm but serious, that there'd been a boating accident 2 nights earlier a few miles off the coast. A small fishing boat had exploded, and parts of it had washed ashore along with personal items. The Coast Guard had been cleaning up for the last 2 days. Some sections of wreckage were still missing, including parts of the hull and possibly remains. Then the smell hit me again, but worse this time, because now my brain understood it wasn't just bad wood. The officer crouched near the fire and used a stick to move one of the half-burnt pieces aside. I turned away immediately. It wasn't wood. It was charred, but it had texture that clearly wasn't right, skin-like, melted into fragments of fiberglass. She covered her mouth and started crying quietly, whispering that she wanted to leave. I couldn't even speak. I just stood there staring at the sand while more officers arrived. They started digging near the rocks, shining flashlights, marking the area with cones. Then one of them shouted something. They found a human arm, partially buried in the tide line. Everything turned into chaos. Police cars lined the beach. The rescue truck lights flashed red and blue across the water, and they started calling in forensic teams. I kept telling them I had no idea, that I thought it was just driftwood. They believed me, but I still had to give a full statement. We sat in the back of a police vehicle for almost an hour, watching as they sectioned off the beach. The officer said the wood I'd used was likely from the wreckage of that same fishing boat. The bodies from the accident had gone missing after the explosion, and they were still searching for pieces. I remember just staring at my hands, blackened from the smoke, thinking about how I picked up that wood so casually, stacking it like it was nothing. How close we'd been to something that shouldn't have even been touched. When they finally let us leave, the fire was still smoldering in the distance, surrounded by police tape. I drove her home in silence. She didn't say a word the whole ride. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the smell, about the moment I kicked that piece of wood and it cracked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The officer said it wasn't my fault, but that didn't really help. Knowing I'd accidentally burned part of someone's body on a first date is not something you can just forget. It's been months, and I still haven't gone back to that beach. I don't think I ever will. I've met her through a mutual friend who swore she was normal. She said she'd just moved into the area for work, and honestly, she seemed chill, funny, a little sarcastic, but easy to talk to. We messaged for a week before agreeing to meet. She picked the place, this quiet restaurant just outside town. It was small, kind of cozy, with candles on every table and bold songs playing low through the speakers. The kind of place where you could actually talk without yelling. I got there first and sat near the back. She walked in about 10 minutes later wearing a denim jacket, hair tied up, carrying this oversized black purse that looked heavy. She smiled when she saw me, sat down, and placed the bag on the floor beside her. Everything started out fine. She ordered pasta, I got a burger, and we started talking about random stuff. Work, music, travel. Nothing deep, just small talk. She laughed easily, but there was something slightly off about her energy. Not in a bad way, just unsettled. Her eyes kept darting toward the front door every so often. I figured she was just nervous or maybe had anxiety about being out with someone new. I didn't push it. Halfway through dinner, her phone buzzed. She picked it up fast, looked at the screen, then flipped it face down. Her mood dipped for a second. I asked if everything was okay, and she said, yeah, just work stuff. I'll let it go. A few minutes later, she leaned over to grab her water, and her purse tipped over. Everything spilled out. Makeup, receipts, a wallet, and then something metal clattered onto the floor. It rolled under the table before stopping against my shoe. I looked down, thinking it was maybe a fork or something, but my stomach dropped. It was a knife. Not like a butter knife. This was a kitchen knife, short but sharp, with a dark handle and red stains smeared along the blade. At first, I told myself it had to be fake, maybe a prop or something. But the red wasn't paint. It was darker, uneven, and the way it caught the light made my throat go dry. She froze, eyes wide for a second, then quickly reached down to grab it. She laughed awkwardly, said something about it being fake, part of a Halloween costume. It wasn't Halloween. The waiter walking by slowed down, looking confused. A couple sitting behind us turned around. The air around the table got heavy fast. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I was panicking. I didn't know what to do. Do I stay? Do I leave? She tucked the knife back into her purse, zipped it shut, and tried to act like nothing happened. She kept smiling, but her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her glass again. That's when I noticed the waiter near the counter whispering to the manager. They both looked toward us, then one of them grabbed the phone. I thought maybe they were just calling security because of the knife, which made sense. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of sirens outside. They got louder, closer, and stopped right outside the restaurant. Everyone inside turned their heads toward the windows. She stiffened instantly. Her face went pale. She mumbled something about needing to go to the restroom, grabbed her purse, and stood up. The manager stepped in front of her, asking her to wait. Before she could respond, the door slammed open. Two police officers came in, scanning the room fast. One of them pointed at her and said her name, except it wasn't the one she told me. She froze again, then dropped the bag. The knife fell out a second time, hitting the tile hard. The officers rushed in, telling everyone to stay seated. One of them pulled her hands behind her back while the other kicked the knife away. People were whispering, phones out, trying to record. I just sat there, completely frozen, my heart racing so fast I couldn't even breathe properly. They told her she was being detained in connection with a stabbing that happened 2 towns over earlier that evening. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. They'd been tracking her through CCTV and credit card activity, and the restaurant staff calling about the weapon had given them her exact location. She kept saying she didn't do anything, that they were wrong, but her voice cracked. The officers weren't listening. They put her in cuffs and led her outside. As they walked her past my table, she looked straight at me, calm, almost blank. No apology, no panic, just this weird, empty stare like she already accepted it. Once she was gone, the restaurant went dead silent. The manager locked the door, and one of the officers came back in to take my statement. They asked how I knew her, how long I had been in contact, and if she'd said anything strange that night. I told them everything, from meeting online to the purse falling. It wrote it all down. Apparently, the stabbing had happened only an hour before our date. A man had been attacked in a parking lot outside a motel, and she'd been caught on camera leaving the scene. It found her car abandoned not far from there and tracked her through a rideshare account to this restaurant. The blood on the knife matched the description of the victim's wounds. The officer said she'd been using fake names for months, hopping from town to town. She'd meet people, stay with them for a while, then vanish. Nobody ever knew her real identity until now. I remember staring at the table, her untouched drink still sitting there, lipstick smudge on the rim. It looked so normal, like none of it had actually happened. After giving my statement, they let me go. I walked out into the cold night air, the police cars still flashing red and blue against the building. People had gathered outside watching, whispering to each other. I kept thinking about how calm she looked when the knife hit the floor the first time, how easily she'd lied about it being fake. When I got home, I read her name online, the real one the police said. There were already articles about her. She'd been connected to a string of violent crimes across multiple towns. Always small details, always on the move. It said she targeted people she met through dating apps or mutual friends. The more I read, the worse it got. Every photo of her looked slightly different. Different hair color, different style, different name under each one. It was like she'd built a dozen fake versions of herself and rotated between them. I stared at her profile picture in my messages for a long time before finally deleting it. It didn't even feel real anymore. Just hours before, I was sitting across from her, laughing, thinking it was a normal date. Now she was probably sitting in a holding cell while detectives went through her bag. Sometimes when I think back to that night, the part that sticks with me isn't the sirens or the cops. It's the sound of that knife hitting the floor. The way it clattered, echoing across the quiet restaurant, turning everything from calm to chaos in a few seconds. That sound still plays in my head sometimes. It started out as one of those dates that seem almost too smooth to be real. We'd been talking online for a few weeks, and he came off as calm, easygoing, funny in that natural way that doesn't feel like he's trying too hard. He said he was house sitting for a family friend who was away for the month, and since he had the place to himself, he offered to cook dinner there instead of going out. He said he loved cooking, and honestly, I thought I was kind of sweet. It felt more personal than a restaurant. The house was in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where every yard looked perfect, trimmed grass, big driveways, and security lights that flicked on when you walked by. He sent me the address and sent a text when I got there. When I pulled up, it was around 7 p.m., just getting dark. The house looked beautiful. 2 stories, white stone walls, and a porch with hanging plants. You could tell the people who owned it had money. He opened the door before I even knocked. He was wearing an apron, smiling like he'd been waiting for me. Inside smelled amazing, something with garlic and butter. The living room looked like something from a magazine. Perfect furniture, big windows, art on the walls, a vase with flowers on the table. He said to make myself comfortable, poured me some wine, and went back to the kitchen. I looked around while he cooked. There were family photos everywhere, 2 kids, a couple, and a golden retriever. I remember asking him if those were the people he was house-sitting for, and he said yeah, his aunt and uncle. The kids were their neighbors apparently, part of the photo to make it look homey. I didn't think much about it. It made sense at the time. We ate dinner at the dining table, candles lit, music low. It was actually really nice. He told stories about working in tech, traveling, random things like learning to surf. He talked like someone who lived a lot of life but never bragged. Everything felt easy. But after a while, I started noticing small things that didn't line up. He didn't seem to know where basic things were. When I asked for a napkin, he opened 3 wrong drawers before finding them. He poured water into fancy crystal glasses but filled them straight from the tap, not the filter pitcher sitting on the counter. When the food was done, he took a photo of it with his phone, like he wanted to remember it. That struck me as odd. Then, while we were eating dessert, I heard something outside, a car door slam. He froze for half a second, then forced a smile. I asked if he was expecting someone, and he said probably just a neighbor. But then there was another sound, a key turning in the front door. He stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, saying I should go to the kitchen for a second. Before I could even move, the door opened, and a man and woman stepped inside. It looked confused at first, then angry. The man shouted something like, "Who are you?" Everything happened at once. The woman pulled out her phone. The man rushed forward, and my date, if that's even what he was, started panicking. He said there had to be a mistake, that he was just house-sitting. The couple looked at each other, then at me, and I could tell immediately this wasn't his aunt and uncle. The woman told me she was calling the police, and that's when I stood up too, trying to explain that I thought he lived there. She told me quietly to stay put. I remember the look in her eyes, half fear, half disbelief. The man demanded to see proof that he was allowed to be there. He said something about having an access code, that the owners gave it to him. She asked who the owners were supposed to be. He stuttered, then said the wrong last name. That was it. The man told him to get out, but instead of leaving, he started backing toward the door, saying he could explain. The woman was already on the phone with 911. Minutes later, flashing blue lights filled the driveway. Police rushed in, told everyone to stay where they were. I was shaking by then, trying to tell them I had no idea what was happening. They separated us, made him stand by the window while they spoke to the homeowners. Turns out he didn't know them at all. He'd broken in using access codes stolen from a real estate management website. Apparently, some smart home systems had been hacked recently, and he'd somehow gotten into theirs. He'd been using the place for weeks, hosting dates, taking photos to make himself look wealthy, even sleeping there when the family was gone. The couple had been on vacation for 10 days. They came back early because their alarm system sent alerts about lights being turned on randomly during the night. They thought it was a glitch until they saw new footprints in their driveway and strange grocery charges under their address. The officers searched his car and found a folder full of printed access codes and screenshots of property listings, homes across different neighborhoods. He'd been doing this for a while, breaking into empty houses, living in them short-term, then leaving before anyone noticed. They arrested him right there. He didn't resist, just stood silent, eyes down, hands behind his back. I watched them lead him out to the police car, the lights flashing across his face. The whole thing felt unreal. After he was gone, the woman came over and asked if I was okay. I said I was, even though I wasn't. She told me I wasn't in trouble, that it wasn't my fault. The police took my statement, asked for screenshots of our messages, and told me I might be called later for more information. When I finally left, the air outside felt cold and heavy. I sat in my car for a while, staring at the house. The lights were still on inside, the couple standing in the doorway talking to officers. I could see the dinner table through the window, the plates still there, candles still burning like nothing had happened. Later that night, I checked the local news. There was already a small article about it. Man arrested for using stolen smart home data to access multiple properties. The article mentioned he used those houses to impress women he met online, pretending he owned them. I kept reading until my chest started to hurt. He wasn't even the first person to do it. I thought about how normal he seemed, how confident, how he didn't hesitate opening that door or cooking in someone else's kitchen. How he made the whole thing feel real just by acting like it was. I deleted all our messages, but I couldn't stop thinking about how easily it could have gone worse. If the owners hadn't come home early, I might have stayed there the whole night thinking I was safe. Now, whenever someone offers to cook at their place, I just smile and say no. It sounded like the simplest, safest plan ever. A movie date. Nothing fancy, nothing awkward like a full dinner where you have to talk for hours. We met on an app, talked for a week, and she seemed chill, funny, into the same kind of movies. Even sent voice notes that made her sound confident and real. She suggested we meet at this small local theater instead of one of the big chain ones because it was quieter and cozier. I thought that actually sounded nice. When I got there, she was already outside, waiting near the poster display, sipping from a can of iced coffee. She looked exactly like her pictures: hoodie, black jeans, messy bun. She gave me this big smile and said she already got the tickets, which I thought was kind of thoughtful. I offered to pay her back, but she just waved it off. The lobby was half empty, just a few people buying snacks and some kids in line for the arcade machines. We grabbed popcorn, went inside, and found seats in the middle row. The lights dimmed right after we sat down. Perfect timing. The trailers rolled, and everything felt normal. She was easy to be around. She laughed at the right moments, leaned over to whisper random comments about the movie, and seemed relaxed. I remember thinking it was going well, one of those rare dates where nothing feels forced. But then, halfway through the movie, something changed. During the quiet scene, she leaned down like she dropped something. I thought she was grabbing her phone or popcorn, but then she stayed crouched longer than made sense. I looked over, and she was glancing behind us, eyes darting like she was checking something. Then out of nowhere, she stood up fast. She whispered that she'd be right back, something about the restroom, and hurried up the aisle. I didn't think much of it at first, but after 5 minutes passed, then 10, I started to get that weird, uneasy feeling. She didn't come back. I figured maybe she was on a call or something, so I decided to wait until the movie ended. But then, just as I was thinking that, the emergency lights flicked on and the movie froze on screen. Everyone started looking around, confused. A voice came over the speakers telling everyone to stay seated. My stomach dropped. A minute later, police officers came in through the side exit, flashlights cutting across the theater. They weren't yelling, but their presence was heavy. They started walking up the aisles, talking quietly to people, checking faces. The whole place went silent, except for the hum of the speakers. One of them stopped near me, asked if I was alone. I said no, that I was here with someone, but she'd gone to the restroom. He asked what she looked like, so I described her. His expression changed instantly, like he already knew who I was talking about. He nodded to another officer, and they left quickly through the same exit she'd gone through. A few minutes later, the rest of us were told to stay inside until they finished securing the area. Everyone was whispering now, confused, anxious. I sat there frozen, popcorn cold in my hand, heart pounding. After what felt like forever, one of the officers came back in and called me out by name. I followed into the hallway, confused and trying not to panic. That's when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor near the concession counter, handcuffed, 2 officers standing beside her. She wasn't saying anything. Her hood was down, hair messy, face completely blank. The officer told me she'd been detained. He said she was being investigated for multiple thefts, wallets, cash, small valuables, taken from people in public places. She'd been caught on CCTV earlier that day at another theater, slipping her hand into people's bags before sitting somewhere else. The staff here had recognized her from a notice police sent out earlier in the week. They'd been told to call as soon as they spotted her. I stood there in shock, trying to process it. The officer explained that she'd been moving between cinemas and restaurants all month, targeting people who were distracted. Tonight, she already hit 2 people before meeting me. They'd been watching her on the theater's security feed the whole time, waiting for confirmation before moving in. Apparently, right before the movie started, she walked around the rows pretending to look for our seats, but had actually been checking bags left on the floor. When she realized staff were watching her, she panicked and tried to leave. That's why she bolted mid-movie. She didn't make it far. They caught her trying to slip out through the side emergency door. I remember looking at her while they read her rights. She didn't cry or argue. She just kept staring straight ahead, breathing slowly like she was thinking about something else entirely. When they led her outside, the whole theater lobby was watching through the glass doors. People who'd had their wallets stolen were already talking to police, holding up their IDs and cards like proof. They asked me to give a statement, so I sat on one of the benches near the ticket counter and explained how I'd met her, how she paid for the tickets, how she acted totally normal. The officer nodded, said she probably used stolen cash. He showed me a small bag they'd taken from her. Inside were 3 wallets, 2 watches, and a handful of loose cards. I didn't recognize any of them. After I finished, they let me go. The theater manager apologized, gave me a free movie voucher, like that was going to make any of this less weird. I walked out into the parking lot still in disbelief. Her car wasn't even there, which meant she'd probably used her rideshare to get dropped off. I kept replaying the night in my head, the way she laughed, the easy conversation, how normal she seemed. It didn't add up. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked her up online. Her name came up right away at a local news site. Serial pickpocket caught at cinema after weeks on the run. The article said she'd been part of a small group who targeted crowded places and acted solo to avoid suspicion. She'd been arrested once before and disappeared after making bail. The part that messed me up the most was how her mugshot looked nothing like the girl I'd met. Same person, but different energy, cold, detached, eyes like she wasn't even there. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing her sitting there next to me in the dark theater, pretending to be interested in the movie, pretending to like me, all while knowing she'd already robbed people sitting a few rows away. Now, whenever I go to the movies, I can't focus during the previews anymore. I keep checking my pockets, watching people walk past, wondering how many are just there for the show, and how many are there for something else entirely. It started like one of those stories you tell your friends because it sounds mysterious, not dangerous. I matched with this guy who wasn't like the usual ones I'd talked to. He didn't try too hard, didn't send cheesy lines or overshare. He just seemed confident, calm, like someone who had his life together. He worked late nights, he said, owned a catering business that rented out spaces for events. He told me he needed his private dining spot no one else really went to anymore, somewhere quiet where he could cook something himself. That alone should have been weird, but he said it in a way that sounded normal. I asked if it was his restaurant, and he laughed and said something about having access. I didn't question it. I thought maybe it was one of those places people rented for photography shoots or special dinners. He said he'd text me the address later that night, and when I got it, it was out near the industrial side of town. Farther than I expected, but I figured it was fine. The place looked abandoned when I arrived. The windows were dark, paint peeling around the doorframe. There was an old neon sign half hanging off the wall that used to spell Fisher's Grill, but only a few letters still glowed faintly. My first thought was that I had the wrong address, but then he appeared from around the corner, wearing a black apron and smiling like this was all totally normal. He unlocked the door and told me to come in. Inside, it didn't look like a restaurant anymore. The furniture was pushed to the side. The floor was covered in dust except for a clear path to the back. There were a few tables set up with candles, and a small portable speaker playing soft jazz. It smelled faintly metallic, mixed with something like clean chemicals. He said it used to be one of his favorite places to cook before it closed, and he still used it sometimes for private meals. I wanted to ask how he even had the keys to a place like this, but I didn't. The food was already being prepared, something sizzling in a pan, garlic and butter filling the air. He'd set up everything himself. 2 plates, wine glasses, and a single bottle of red that looked old and expensive. It was honestly impressive. We sat down, and I tried to relax. The lights flickered slightly overhead, and there was a low humming sound somewhere deeper in the building. When I asked what it was, he said it was the refrigeration units. They still worked, and he used them to store food for catering gigs. We talked about random things. He told me how he learned to cook, how he used to help his uncle run restaurants around the city. He said this one closed years ago after a fire in the kitchen, but the equipment still worked, and he liked keeping it alive. The way he said that stuck in my head, keeping it alive. At one point, I excused myself to use the restroom. He told me it was down the hall past the kitchen. The hallway was narrow, with tiles cracked along the floor. I passed a door with a thick metal handle and noticed a cold draft coming from underneath it. That low hum was louder there. When I glanced through the small glass window in the door, I saw a row of metal coolers lining the back wall. They were industrial size, like the kind used for storing large cuts of meat. Each had a faint frost building up along the edges. One was slightly open, and I could see plastic wrap covering something inside. I thought it was just frozen food until I noticed the dark stains on the floor, faint, but there. I remember standing there for a few seconds too long, just staring at that door. The air felt heavy, and I started feeling this weird tightness in my chest. I turned to leave, but just then, I heard sirens in the distance. At first, I thought it was nothing, just passing traffic, but they got louder, closer. I walked back toward the dining area, and he was standing by the table, frozen, listening. The sirens grew so close they sounded like they were right outside. He turned off the speaker, blew out the candles, and muttered that we should probably finish another time. His calm voice cracked slightly when he said it. I backed up, confused. Then bright red and blue lights flashed through the front windows, lighting up the entire room. Before I could even process what was happening, someone banged on the door and shouted for him to open up. He froze completely. Then he looked at me, just stared, not saying anything. Another bang. The glass rattled. He suddenly moved fast, grabbing my arm and whispering that I needed to go out the back door, that this was all a misunderstanding. I pulled away from him, and that's when the door burst open. Police flooded in, guns raised, shouting orders. They told him to get on the ground. He didn't fight. He just dropped to his knees, hands up like he'd been waiting for this moment. I stood there shaking, not even sure what I was looking at. One officer pulled me aside while the others spread through the building. I told them I had no idea what was going on, that I was just there for dinner. They looked at me like they weren't sure if they believed me. A few minutes later, one of the other officers came out of the back hallway, pale-faced, and whispered something to his partner. They led me outside. I stood by one of the patrol cars while they went back in. I could see the coolers through the doorway, the frost glinting under the flashlights. An ambulance arrived, and more officers started taping off the area. It took a while before anyone told me what was happening. One of the detectives said they'd been tracking the missing persons case for days. The last known location from the victim's phone had pinged in this area. They didn't expect to find this. He'd been using the abandoned restaurant for weeks, maybe months. Police found IDs, wallets, and phones belonging to several missing people in one of the office drawers. The coolers weren't storing meat, they were holding remains. They didn't say how many. I had to give the statement. I told them everything, the messages, how we met, how normal he seemed. They said he used dating apps to meet people and lure them out there, telling each person a different story. House sitting, catering, private dining spot. It was all a setup. They showed me his real name later that night. It wasn't the one he'd given me. He'd been arrested once before for theft, but vanished after skipping bail. The restaurant had been closed for nearly 5 years, but he changed the locks himself. The news covered it for weeks. Every time they showed his photo, I felt sick. I kept thinking about the sound of those coolers humming in the back, the faint stains I saw on the floor, the way he smiled when he said he liked keeping the place alive. Now, whenever someone offers to cook for me, I make sure it's in a real restaurant with a crowd and working lights. I still can't walk past empty buildings without hearing that low hum in the back of my head. It started out as one of those first dates that actually felt normal for once. No awkward silences, no weird energy. Just two people laughing over cheap food in a small diner that smelled like coffee and fries. I met her online about a week before. She was funny, sharp, always had something clever to say. She picked the diner because she said she liked places that weren't trying too hard. That kind of made me like her more. We talked for hours about random stuff. Old TV shows, music, how we both hated small talk. She had this calm confidence, like nothing really threw her off. The night went fast, and before I knew it, we were the last ones there. The waitress started cleaning tables, giving us that look like it was time to go. So we left, still laughing about something dumb she'd said about the food. Outside, it was colder than I expected. The street was quiet, just a few cars passing now and then. She pulled her jacket tighter and said she'd walk with me since her bus stop was on the way. The streetlights buzzed faintly, throwing long shadows across the pavement. Everything felt calm. A few blocks in, I suggested taking the main road to the station, but she stopped and pointed toward a narrow side alley between two buildings. She said it was faster. I looked down it. It was dark, one of those alleys with flickering lights and trash bins lining the wall. It didn't look great. I laughed and said maybe we should just stick to the main street, but she insisted. Said she'd used that shortcut a bunch of times before. She didn't seem nervous about it, so I shrugged and followed. The alley smelled damp, like old rain and garbage. The concrete was uneven, and puddles glistened under the dim lights. She walked ahead fast, like she knew exactly where she was going. Every now and then she'd glance back and smile, making some comment about how people always avoid shortcuts like this for no reason. About halfway through, we passed a large dumpster pushed up against the wall. It stank, but there was something else, something sharp underneath the smell. I didn't think about it much, but she hesitated for a split second when we walked by it, just long enough to notice. We reached the end of the alley where it opened back onto another street. Just as she stepped forward, blue and red lights flashed across the walls. A police car turned the corner fast, tires splashing through a puddle. Another followed right behind it. They stopped right in front of the alley exit. 2 officers got out immediately, flashlights up, shouting for us to stop. My heart started racing because I didn't even know what was happening. I looked at her, and for the first time that night, she didn't look calm. Her face went pale, eyes wide. She froze completely. The officers came closer, telling us to keep our hands visible. I tried to speak, to ask what was going on, but they were focused on her. One of them asked her name, and when she said it, the other officer repeated it into his radio. He got a response almost instantly, then looked out sharply. They told her to step forward. She didn't move. One officer walked around me and grabbed her wrist gently but firm. That's when she finally spoke, trying to say it was a mistake, that she didn't do anything. The officer's face didn't change. He told her again to step away from me, then turned his flashlight toward the alley we just walked through. More flashing lights filled the street. A second patrol car pulled up, then an unmarked vehicle. People were starting to gather across the street watching. I just stood there, confused, my stomach tight. One officer asked if I'd been with her all night, where we met, what we were doing. I told him it was our first date, that we'd just eaten and were walking to the bus stop. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. Another officer came running back from the alley, whispering something to his partner. I caught a few words. Body dumpster matches description. My head started spinning. I looked back down the alley and saw 2 officers kneeling near the big metal bin we passed. They cuffed her right there in front of me. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just kept her eyes down, saying over and over that she didn't do anything. The officer turned to me and told me to stay put while they sorted it out. I could hear radio chatter now, something about a witness, a security camera, a timestamp. After a few minutes, one of the officers explained it. There'd been a 911 call earlier that night from a street a few blocks away. Someone saw a woman arguing with a man outside a bar. The man never showed up anywhere after that. His phone pinged near this alley before shutting off. Patrols had been searching the area when they found a body dumped near the dumpster we just walked by. The description of the woman at the scene matched her. Same jacket, same hair color, same build. They'd been tracking her through nearby cameras, following her route until the signal led straight to this alley. That's why they stopped us. I kept saying I didn't know anything, that I'd only just met her. They took my statement, asked for screenshots of our messages, and said I could leave after they confirmed my story. I watched as they led her to the patrol car, still calm but quiet, face blank now. When I got home, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The shortcut, the dumpster, the look on her face when the sirens hit. I searched her name online later that night, and it didn't take long for the story to break. Local news ran an article about a woman arrested in connection to a homicide. The details matched everything. Apparently, she'd met the guy she argued with through the same app she met me on. They'd gone drinking earlier that night, something went wrong, and witnesses said they saw her leave alone. His body was found in the alley just hours later. The police were still investigating, but her photo was already everywhere. I couldn't believe it. The same person who was laughing with me over fries a few hours earlier was now all over the news for murder. What stuck with me the most was the way she smiled when she suggested the shortcut, how confident she looked walking ahead of me through that dark alley, like she knew exactly where it led. Now, every time someone on a date suggests taking a shortcut, I just tell them no. It was one of those nights where everything felt a bit too normal. We met at a small grill bar near the city center, quiet enough to talk, but busy enough that it didn't feel awkward. He was nice, polite in a slightly awkward way, and he paid attention when I talked. I remember thinking it was refreshing that he didn't just stare at his phone like most guys do. We talked about work, family, movies, just regular stuff. He offered to pick me up earlier, but I said I'd meet him there. He didn't push it, just smiled and said he could at least drop me home after. I didn't see any harm in it. By the end of the night, it felt like we got along well enough that accepting a ride wasn't a big deal. It was late, cold, and I didn't feel like waiting for a cab. His car looked clean, new, one of those gray hatchbacks that blend in everywhere. He opened the passenger door for me, which made me laugh a bit. It felt old-fashioned. When I got in, the inside smelled faintly like air freshener mixed with something else. Not bad exactly, but weird. He said it was new car smell, but it didn't really smell like that. We started driving, chatting about random things. He seemed relaxed, confident on the road, and didn't drive too fast. But after about 5 minutes, the smell got stronger. It wasn't perfume or food. It was something heavier, sour almost. I tried not to make it obvious that I noticed, but it was hard to ignore. I cracked the window a little and asked if something had spilled. He said it was probably the cleaning products from the boot. He left it off, saying he'd been moving stuff earlier. His tone was light, but something about it felt rehearsed. We hit a red light, and I used the moment to glance back. The back seat was empty, but a dark blanket covered the back floor. Nothing strange, just neat, too neat. Then the smell hit stronger again, like something stale had been sitting too long. When we started moving again, I noticed a noise from the back, soft thuds, muffled. It could have been something rolling around, but the pattern didn't sound like that. He turned up the radio slightly, which made it harder to tell. We passed a few more streets, and I started getting uneasy. My phone was in my lap, and I kept pretending to scroll through messages. My heart was beating way too fast for how calm I was pretending to be. The smell was thick now, and he'd stopped making small talk completely. His eyes were locked on the road. I typed out a message to my friend, but didn't send it yet. I didn't want him to notice. Then the noise came again, a soft, whining sound this time, like something breathing through fabric. It made my skin crawl. He must have noticed me tense up because he said his neighbor's dog had been in the car earlier, and the smell was probably from that. He laughed again, but it was quick, nervous. That's when I decided to trust my gut. I kept the conversation going, asked him about work, family, anything to seem normal while I quietly shared my location with my friend. I texted, "Something's off. Call me in 5." When my friend called, I answered with a fake cheerful voice, saying I'd be home soon. She played along immediately. He didn't react, but I saw his knuckles tighten slightly on the steering wheel. We turned down a quieter road, one I didn't recognize. He said it was a shortcut that'd get me home faster. I smiled but casually said I preferred main roads at night. He hesitated and nodded and changed direction, taking us back toward the busier street. I could tell he didn't like it, though. Just then, blue lights flashed behind us. A police car pulled up, siren chirping once. I froze, not sure what was happening. He looked in the rear-view mirror, jaw tightening. The officer gestured for him to pull over. He muttered something under his breath, but complied. We pulled to the side, and the officer approached his window. He asked for ID and registration, standard stuff. The other officers circled around to my side, shining a flashlight through the back window. Then everything shifted. The officer at my window frowned, tapping the glass slightly. He asked him to pop the boot. He hesitated, then reached slowly toward the controls. The officer's hand went to his belt immediately. That's when I realized this wasn't just a random stop. They told him to step out of the vehicle. He tried to stay calm, asking what the problem was. The officer repeated the order, voice firm. When he got out, the other officer opened the boot. The smell hit immediately, strong, raw, animal-like. The flashlight beam landed on a small shape under the blanket. It moved. It was a dog, muzzle tied loosely, eyes wide. The blanket was soaked and smelled foul. The officer shouted for the other to secure him. I sat frozen, staring as they pulled the dog out gently. Then I saw what else was inside, a stack of license plates, some new, some old, all with different numbers. He tried to explain, saying it was all misunderstanding, that he rescued strays, that the plates were from junk cars. The officers weren't buying it. They cuffed him right there by the side of the road. More patrol cars arrived minutes later. They asked me to step out and give a statement. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. The officer told me they'd been on alert for a car matching his description since earlier that day. There'd been reports of stolen dogs and license plates used in vehicle scams across the area. They'd flagged the car through surveillance when they saw it pass one of their checkpoints. The worst part was that he didn't look angry or scared while they searched the car. He just stood there calm, like he knew it was over and didn't care. He didn't even look at me once. The police said the dog was likely stolen from a breeder 2 towns over. They found a small tracking device in his collar, which led them close to the area before spotting his car. That's why they'd been following him. They took him away, and I gave my statement. They asked how I knew him, and I told them about the date, the smell, the noises, everything. The officer said I did the right thing by staying calm and sharing my location. I don't even remember how I got home. I think one of the officers drove me. That night, I sat on my bed replaying everything. The smell, the noises, the way he brushed it off like it was nothing. When I finally checked the news a few days later, there was a small article about it. He'd been linked to several stolen dogs and fake registrations. They thought he'd been running some underground scheme selling animals online under fake names. The photo in the article was him, smiling in a way that looked so normal it made my skin crawl. Now I never accept rides from dates, no matter how nice they seem, because I still remember the way that car smelled and how close I was to finding out what else he might have been hiding in that boot. I thought I'd met someone completely different this time. She had this effortless confidence, the kind that made you think she'd been through a lot but never let it show. We matched on a dating app, and she suggested meeting at a bar inside a fancy hotel downtown. She said she loved the atmosphere, quiet, classy, the kind of place where everyone pretended to be richer than they actually were. I showed up early because I didn't want to look like I'd rushed there. The place looked like something out of a movie. Dim lights, people in tailored clothes, soft jazz from a live van in the corner. The bar had golden light glowing off all the bottles behind the counter. She walked in right on time, wearing a black dress and heels, hair up like she'd stepped out of some fashion ad. Heads actually turned when she passed. She smiled when she saw me, that polite, perfect kind of smile. We sat near the window, and right away I noticed she kept glancing over my shoulder. Not in a distracted way, more like she was watching for something. I thought maybe she was shy or nervous, so I didn't think much of it. We ordered drinks and she started talking about travel. Paris, Rome, Dubai. She had stories for every place. She told me she worked in luxury sourcing, which I didn't really understand, but she said it involved helping clients find rare items. It sounded cool, and she definitely looked the part. But every few minutes, she'd glance at the door or scan the tables around us. Her eyes would flick to the waiters, then to a group of people sitting at the bar. It wasn't just nervous energy. She looked like she was checking for someone. I finally asked if she was okay, and she laughed it off, saying she thought she recognized someone from work. Still, the longer we sat there, the stranger it got. Every time someone new came in, her posture would change slightly, shoulders tight, hand brushing the strap of her bag. Once, when a man in a gray coat walked by, she froze completely until he passed. Then she exhaled and smiled like nothing happened. The weirdest part came when she excused herself to take a call. She left her clutch on the table, so I didn't think she was bailing. But when I glanced down, the bag was slightly open. Inside, I saw something glint. At first, I thought it was makeup or a compact mirror, but it wasn't. It was jewelry, rings, bracelets, a small velvet pouch. The kind of stuff you don't just carry around for fun. Before I could process that, she came back all smiles again, acting like everything was fine. She said her client was being a pain, but laughed it off. The bag was closed now, and I didn't mention what I saw. But something about the way she casually placed her hand over it told me she knew I noticed. After a while, she asked if I wanted another drink, and when she stood to go to the bar, I saw her quickly glance at a man sitting near the corner booth. He was pretending to read the menu but kept looking up at her. They made brief eye contact, then both looked away. It felt deliberate, like they knew each other but didn't want anyone to notice. She came back with drinks and started talking fast, like she was trying to fill the silence. But her eyes kept darting toward the same man. I was starting to get uncomfortable. Then, out of nowhere, she stood up again and said she needed a breath of fresh air. Before I could even react, she was heading toward the exit. That's when it happened. Two men near the bar stood up at the same time and walked after her. They weren't loud, didn't yell, didn't make a scene. They moved like they knew exactly what they were doing. She made it halfway to the door before one of them reached her. He said something quietly, flashed something that looked like a badge, and suddenly another man, someone who'd been sitting behind us the entire time, stood up too. Within seconds, the air in the room changed. She froze completely, her bag still in her hand. The man with the badge spoke again, firm this time, and she slowly placed the bag on the table by the door. Everyone in the bar turned to look. One of the officers gently took it and opened it in front of her. Even from across the room, I could see the sparkle of jewelry catching the light. It happened so fast, no shouting, no drama. They handcuffed her quietly, led her toward the exit, and the hotel security blocked the doors. One of the officers told everyone to stay seated for a few minutes. I just sat there, heart racing, trying to piece together what the hell I'd just seen. Eventually, an officer came over to me, asked if I was with her. I said yes, but only for the night. He nodded and asked if I'd seen anything suspicious. I told him about her scanning the room, leading for calls, the jewelry in her bag. He wrote everything down, thanked me, and said she was under investigation for multiple counts of theft and fraud. Apparently, she'd been selling stolen jewelry at high-end bars and lounges, posing as a luxury trader. She'd meet men online, charm them into taking her to expensive spots, and then quietly trade stolen pieces with her contacts mid-date. Tonight, the bar staff had already called it in after recognizing her from security photos sent around the city. The officers had been watching her the entire time. After she was gone, I stayed seated for a while, just watching the lights of the bar reflect off my glass. It didn't feel real. She'd seemed so composed, so confident, like someone who belonged in that setting. But underneath all that polish, she'd been running a whole operation right under everyone's noses. I left after giving my statement. The staff apologized for the chaos and even offered me a free drink, but I didn't take it. The moment I stepped outside, I saw the police car still parked under the hotel canopy, her silhouette sitting in the back seat. She turned her head slightly, saw me, and gave the smallest smile before looking away. That image stuck with me more than anything else. The way she didn't look scared, just resigned, like she'd done this before, and this was just another night gone wrong. Later, I searched her name online, and nothing came up. Not her real one, anyway. The name she'd given me wasn't real. The police must have told me her alias without realizing. I never found out what happened to her after that night. Now, whenever I walk into a fancy bar, I always notice the people scanning the room, the ones who look too alert, too aware. I can't help wondering how many of them are just waiting for someone else to walk in. It started with what sounded like an opportunity. He messaged me after we matched on an app, said he was a freelance photographer who did shoots for fun and wanted to expand his portfolio. I wasn't a model or anything, but I posted a few photos that looked decent, so I figured that's why he asked. He said it would be simple, just a few creative portraits, nothing weird. He sounded normal, polite, not pushy at all. We talked for a few days before actually meeting. He sent me his photography page, and it looked legit. Clean photos, all artsy with that moody lighting people like. The comments under them were full of compliments. I even Googled his name and found a few links to what looked like small exhibitions or collaborations. So when he said he wanted to do a shoot at his apartment studio downtown, I thought, fine, why not? He texted me the address that morning. The building was in a decent area, kind of run down on the outside, but still okay. The hallway smelled like paint and cleaning fluid. When he opened the door, he had that same calm energy as online. Friendly, collected, the type of guy who made you feel like he'd done this 1,000 times. The apartment looked like a real workspace. There were lights set up, a camera on a tripod, and rolls of backdrops hanging from the ceiling. A couch pushed to the side, a desk with a laptop open showing some photos. It looked professional enough to make me relax. He offered me a drink, water, or coffee, and then explained what he wanted to do. Some simple portraits by the window, maybe a few creative shots with colored light. He even showed me a small folder of reference photos he printed. Everything looked normal. The first half hour went smoothly. He was good at giving direction without being weird. Kind of small talk that makes time go faster. What music I liked if I'd done shoots before, what my favorite city was. But then slowly, things started to feel off. At one point, he took a photo and then said he needed to adjust the lighting. He went to the laptop and started typing, and that's when I noticed something strange. On the screen, next to the folder of photo files, there were other folders. Each had women's names on them. Not like regular editing folders. They had random notes next to them, things like March set or agreement copy. When he caught me glancing at it, he quickly minimized the window and smiled like nothing happened. He told me to stand near the backdrop again and tried to change the subject. My stomach felt weird, but I brushed it off, telling myself maybe those were just projects. A few minutes later, while he was changing the lens, I heard a faint buzz from his phone on the counter. He didn't pick it up right away, but when he did, his whole demeanor shifted. He glanced at me, then at the door, and said something under his breath like he needed to wrap up soon. He seemed distracted, now tense. He told me he wanted to get a few last shots for the profile. He switched off one of the lights and said he liked the shadows better that way. The whole room dimmed. I stood there awkwardly waiting for him to tell me what to do next, but he just stared at the camera screen for a long time before finally saying I could take a break. I picked up my bag from the couch, pretending to check my phone, and that's when I saw another open tab on his laptop. A chat window. The messages were short, half sentences, but one stood out. It said, "She's here now." Then another one popped up almost instantly. "Make sure you get something usable." Before I could process that, there was a loud knock on the door. He froze, eyes darting toward it. The knocking turned into pounding. A voice shouted from outside, firm and direct, "Police." Everything after that happened fast. He stepped toward the camera like he didn't know what to do. The door burst open, and 3 officers stormed in. One of them told me to step aside, and the others went straight for him. He tried to explain, stuttering, but they already had him against the wall in seconds. I stood there shaking, my heart racing. One of the officers asked if I was okay, then told me to grab my things and move away from the equipment. They started unplugging cords and searching the desk. I watched as they opened the laptop and scrolled through the folders. The officer's expression tightened immediately. Apparently, he wasn't just a photographer. The police said later that night, after taking my statement, that he'd been running a blackmail scam for months. He would meet people online, convince them to model for his portfolio, and then secretly record or photograph them without permission. He used the footage to extort money, claiming he'd release it if they didn't pay. Some people had already come forward after receiving threats. They'd been tracking him for weeks, tracing his IP and messages through fake accounts. Tonight was supposed to be his next session, and I just happened to be the one who showed up. The message I'd seen on his screen was from one of his accomplices, who was supposed to collect the data after he uploaded it. The officers found multiple hard drives hidden in the cabinet, each labeled with fake initials. One of them held a folder with my name already written on it, even though we hadn't finished a shoot. That part messed with me the most. It meant he planned everything before I even arrived. They took him away in cuffs, still trying to talk his way out of it. I sat outside the building for what felt like an hour, watching the flashing lights fade while an officer explained that I'd been lucky they moved when they did. They planned to raid him tomorrow, but one of his messages slipped through earlier that day, saying he had a new client coming that evening. I gave my statement, showed them the messages between us, the fake photography page, everything. The page was taken down within hours, but I found out later there were at least 3 others under different names. All the same photos, all the same format, just slight variations in style. I went home that night, deleted every dating app I had, and sat there staring at the wall for a long time. It wasn't just that I'd almost been part of something like that. It was how easily it all looked real. The photos, the setup, the calm voice, the fake professionalism. Weeks later, I saw a local article about the case. They recovered hundreds of images and videos tied to his network, all from fake modeling sessions. The police said he'd made thousands of dollars blackmailing people who didn't even know they were being recorded. I don't think I'll ever forget how normal he seemed at first, how he smiled when I walked in, how easy it was to trust someone who looked the part. Now, every time someone mentions being a photographer, I feel that same tightness in my chest again. I can't look at studio lights or backdrops without hearing that knock at the door in my head. It was one of those evenings that felt too normal to go wrong. Warm air, crowds moving like one big wave, and that constant buzz of music and chatter. She picked the place, a night market a few towns over. Said it was her favorite spot, full of lights, food, and the best people watching ever. I didn't argue. It sounded like a fun first date idea, something different. I got there early and walked around a bit. The whole place smelled like fried food and sweet drinks. Stalls lined both sides of a long street, each with some mix of flashing lights and people yelling about deals. You could buy anything: handmade jewelry, weird snacks, fake sneakers, even plants. It felt alive, packed, loud. She showed up wearing this loose denim jacket and her hair tied back, smiling like she already owned the place. She had that kind of energy that made you want to follow her, like she knew where all the fun stuff was. She linked her arm through mine right away and pulled me toward the food stalls. Everything about her was fast. The way she talked, the way she pointed at things, how she moved from one booth to another before I even caught up. She didn't seem nervous, just restless, like she was waiting for something to happen. We got some fried noodles from a street cart and sat near the curb to eat. She kept looking around between bites, eyes darting through the crowd. I asked if she was expecting someone, and she laughed it off, said she just liked watching people. When we finished eating, she stood up quick and said she wanted to check out a row of stalls toward the back where the lights were dimmer. I followed. They were mostly small charity setups, local groups collecting donations for animal shelters and community projects. The stalls weren't fancy, just tables with posters and boxes taped shut with coin slots on top. She slowed down there, her mood changing slightly. Less talk, more focus. She'd stop at one, look around for a second too long, then move to the next. I thought she was just curious until she started asking questions. Small ones about what the charities did, how the donations worked. Her tone was too casual, like she wasn't actually listening. I started getting this weird feeling. Something about how calm she seemed in all the noise. She kept her hand in her jacket pocket most of the time, and every so often she'd glance over her shoulder. I figured maybe she was anxious or just didn't like crowds. Then it happened fast. We stopped at one stall with a sign about helping local kids. The woman running it smiled, busy talking to another person. The cash box sat near the edge of the table, covered by a small cloth. While the woman turned to grab something, my date reached out and slipped the entire box into her tote bag like it was second nature. No hesitation, no panic. It disappeared in one smooth motion. I froze. She turned to me with a calm face, mouthed "walk," and started moving like nothing happened. I followed her automatically, too stunned to think. My brain didn't even process what I'd seen until we were halfway down the next row. That's when I heard it, someone yelling behind us. The woman had noticed. A few others started shouting, and suddenly the crowd shifted. My date sped up, weaving through people. I tried to catch up, calling her name, but she didn't even look back. Then, before I could react, she ducked behind the stall and vanished into the crowd. I stood there like an idiot, trying to spot her denim jacket among the moving lights. People were pointing, and security guards started pushing through the aisles. Then I saw them, 2 police officers near the entrance talking into radios. Someone must have called them. And that's when it all went downhill for me. I turned around to leave to get out of the way, and immediately felt someone grab my shoulder. A cop spun me around and asked where she went. I didn't even know what to say. My mind went blank. I stammered something about just meeting her tonight, but they didn't care. The stall owner had pointed in our direction, and to them, I looked like her partner in crime. Next thing I knew, they had me against a table. The other officer checked my pockets, my bag, everything. People were staring, whispering, recording with their phones. I kept saying I didn't do anything, that I didn't even know what was happening. They weren't listening. While they questioned me, more officers started checking nearby stalls. I heard one of them say there'd been another theft down the row, another cash box missing from a different charity table. That's when I realized this wasn't random. She planned the whole thing. The night market, the crowds, the noise. It was perfect for her. After a few minutes, an officer said they needed to review security footage. They told me to stay put. I stood there surrounded by cops and flashing lights, completely embarrassed, still trying to explain I wasn't involved. The crowd had started thinning now, people whispering as they passed. About 10 minutes later, one of the officers came back with a phone showing the footage from a nearby stall camera. It clearly showed her face for jacket, her stealing the boxes. And me, standing there right beside her the whole time. I could see how bad it looked. They didn't let me go right away. They said they needed to verify my story. I gave them everything: her name, our messages, screenshots from the app, even the time she texted me to meet her. They checked her name in the system, but it turned out she'd used a fake one. The number she texted me from didn't match any real ID either. Eventually, after almost an hour, it let me go but told me not to leave town in case they needed a follow-up statement. I walked to my car in silence, the sound of the market still going faintly in the distance, like nothing happened. When I got home, I sat staring at my phone. I went back through our messages, trying to figure out if I'd missed something obvious. The way she joked about being good with her hands, how she said she liked doing something exciting. It all sounded harmless at the time, but now it just felt dark. 2 days later, I got a call from the police. They found her. She'd been caught in another town doing the same thing: charity stalls, small markets, even street fundraisers. She'd been moving from place to place, using fake names, pretending to be on casual dates while pulling small thefts to fund whatever she was doing. They said she had several warrants already out under different aliases. She used dating apps to find someone to blend in with, someone harmless who made her look less suspicious. That night, I was just her cover. The part that still sticks with me isn't even the cops or the embarrassment. It's the look on her face right before she ran. Calm, focused, almost bored, like she'd done it 100 times before and knew exactly how it would end. Now, whenever someone suggests meeting at a night market, I make up an excuse. The sound of those crowds, the smell of food, the flicker of lights, it all feels fake now. It started off casual, nothing strange about it at all. We'd been messaging for about 2 weeks. He seemed chill, a little quiet, but in a good way. The kind of person who asked questions instead of talking about himself too much. We'd been trying to pick a place to meet and couldn't decide, so he suggested something spontaneous. Said he wanted to go for a drive, maybe grab food somewhere outside the city. He made it sound like an adventure, and I said yes before thinking it through. He picked me up around 7. The car was spotless, smelled like lemon air freshener. He wasn't overly talkative, but his tone was calm, polite. We played random songs on the radio, joked about how bad the signal was once we left town. It felt like one of those weird, unplanned nights that end up being fun just because you didn't expect anything from it. We stopped for food at some gas station diner on the highway. He paid, said it was on him, and then we kept driving. By the time I realized we were pretty far from the city, I asked where we were actually going. He said there was this quiet place he knew, some small motel he'd stayed at once before while on a work trip. He said the view was nice and the food was cheap. I didn't love the idea that we were already halfway there and he didn't sound sketchy. It was late and part of me didn't want to argue. The air outside the car felt humid, heavy, like rain was coming. When we got there, it wasn't what I pictured. The motel looked old, paint peeling, a buzzing neon sign that only half worked, and a single vending machine by the front office. The parking lot had maybe 2 other cars. A flickering light over the door made the whole place look like a scene from a forgotten road movie. He parked and went inside to check in. I stayed in the car, scrolling through my phone. A few minutes later, he came back with a room key. He looked weirdly pleased, like everything was going exactly how he wanted. We walked to the room. It smelled like cleaning spray and something damp underneath. The curtains were heavy, the walls this faded orange color. There was a small TV on a dresser, an old air conditioner rattling near the window, and one of those cheap tables with mismatched chairs. He threw his bag on the bed and said he grabbed drinks from the vending machine. While he was gone, I sat on the edge of the bed scrolling again, trying to text a friend just to let them know where I was. The signal barely worked. Then I heard voices outside. One of them was his. He was talking to the guy at the front desk. The only reason I noticed was because they weren't exactly quiet. Something about needing to pay in cash next time, and the ID not scanning right. That made me pause. When he came back, he acted normal again, handed me a soda, and sat down. He didn't mention what the conversation was about. I told myself not to overthink it. After a few minutes, he turned on the TV. There was some old action movie playing, the sound low enough that the background noise filled the room. That's when I heard it, a radio or scanner crackling faintly from somewhere outside. I thought maybe it was the front desk guy or a nearby room. It wasn't unusual for motels like this to have police chatter playing quietly, especially near highways. But then I caught my own name. At first, I thought I misheard. The voice was calm, robotic, reading something like a report. Then I heard the name again, this time followed by a description. Female, mid-20s, brown hair, gray hoodie. It matched me exactly. I froze. The scanner kept going, and then I heard his name, or at least the name he gave me. But the description didn't match. The voice said the name belonged to a man in his late 30s wanted for questioning in a kidnapping case 2 counties over. It said he was traveling with a woman, possibly under a false identity. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I looked at him sitting across from me, calmly sipping his drink like nothing was happening. I didn't know if he could hear the scanner too, or if he was pretending not to. He caught me looking at him and smiled, asking if I was okay. I forced a nod, said I just felt tired. He said we could head back early in the morning. Then he reached into his bag and started messing with something. His wallet, maybe. I saw a few different cards inside, but the names didn't all match. I caught a glimpse of a driver's license that didn't have the same name he told me. The photo looked like him, but older, different hair. He must have noticed my expression change because his whole vibe shifted. He stood up slow, like he was trying not to spook me. Said he'd go get ice from the machine. I nodded again and waited until the door clicked shut behind him. I grabbed my phone, but there was still no service. I checked the window, but it only opened a few inches. My head was spinning, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to run out and make it worse, but I couldn't just sit there either. Then from outside, I heard the radio again, closer this time. The voice was clearer, saying they'd traced the vehicle from highway cameras. My stomach dropped. They were here. Flashing lights flickered through the window before I even stood up. I heard shouting, boots hitting the pavement. A loud knock pounded on the door. Someone yelled for anyone inside to come out with their hands visible. I opened the door slowly, terrified. Before I could speak, 2 officers grabbed me and pulled me aside. Another one went straight for him. He was already on the ground by the time I looked over, hands behind his back, face pressed to the dirt. They separated us right away. One officer started asking me questions. My name, how I knew him, how long I'd been there. I was too shocked to say much. Turns out, he wasn't who he said he was. The police explained later that night that he'd been using fake IDs for months, checking into motels with women he met online. They suspected he was part of a small operation involving abductions and extortion. The victims were always people he lured out of town with some casual excuse: road trips, photo shoots, random getaways. They'd been tracking his car since morning after a tip came in from a gas station clerk who thought something seemed off about him. The ID he used there had a number that came up in their system, connected to an active warrant. By the time they caught up, I was already with him. They let me go after hours of questions. The police gave me water, helped me call my parents, and made sure I had a ride back. I remember sitting in the back of the squad car watching him through the window as they loaded him into another one. He didn't fight, didn't yell, didn't even look surprised. Just stared straight ahead like it was routine. When I got home, I checked the news. There wasn't much, just a short article about a suspect caught in connection to a string of kidnappings, pending investigation. No names, no faces, just the words apprehended at a local motel after being tracked by police scanner. Sometimes I still think about how normal he seemed that night, how calm, how easy it was to get in that car without questioning a thing. It started like one of those dates that feels easy from the start. We met through a friend of a friend, someone who said she was funny and different in a good way. She worked 2 jobs, one at a diner and another at a car wash on the edge of town. She texted me first, which I thought was cool, and we planned to grab dinner after her shift. She picked the place, a small burger spot near the main road, quiet, neon lights buzzing outside, the kind of place where you could actually talk without shouting. She showed up in her work clothes, blue coveralls, and sneakers, hair tied up, hands still smelling faintly like soap and oil. She laughed about it, said she didn't have time to change. I didn't care. It made her seem normal, grounded. We ordered food and talked about random things. She was easy to talk to, confident but not cocky. She said she liked cars, that she'd grown up helping her uncle fix them. Halfway through dinner, she mentioned she had to stop at work after. Something about finishing a night job, a few cars that needed to be washed before morning. She said I should come hang out, that it wasn't far. I didn't really have plans, so I said sure. She grinned, said she'd make it worth my time, then paid for the meal before I could argue. We drove in her car, an old Honda with the stereo half broken and a bunch of tools rolling around in the back. The car wash was about 10 minutes away, tucked behind a chain of old warehouses. The sign out front flickered, crystal clean auto, and the lot was mostly empty except for a few cars parked under dim yellow lights. The place didn't look sketchy at first, just old. There was a big garage door half open, a faint hum from pressure washers, and a smell of soap and wet concrete. She parked near the back, waved to a guy leaning on a metal barrel, and said she'd be right out after checking something. I followed her inside. The air inside was damp, echoey. Water dripped from hoses, and steam rose off the concrete floor. There were cars lined up in a row, some dusty, some spotless, all different makes and models. A few looked too expensive for this kind of place. Mercedes, Lexus, even a black Range Rover with no plates. She grabbed a towel and started wiping down one of the cars like it was nothing. I leaned against the wall, watching her work. She was quick, efficient, but something about how focused she was didn't feel right. Every few minutes, someone new walked in through the side door, handed her keys, said a few words, and left again. No receipts, no forms, no names, just quick exchanges and quiet nods. At one point, she looked over and said I could help if I wanted, just wipe down a hood or two. I laughed and said I'd probably make it worse. She grinned but didn't push. I started noticing little details that made less and less sense. The plates on some of the cars were mismatched. A few still had dealership stickers. Others had new ones with no registration tags. One car had its ignition panel hanging loose like someone had messed with it. Another had tape residue where a GPS mount should have been. When I asked about it, she brushed it off, said her boss ran side deals fixing up cars for people who didn't want to go through insurance. Sounded half believable, but something in her tone didn't match her words. Then, a few minutes later, a black man pulled up. Two guys got out, both in dark hoodies, faces hidden under caps. They backed the van into one of the bays, and she walked over to talk to them. The conversation was quiet, tense. She kept glancing toward me, like deciding if I should even be there. One of the guys handed her a clipboard, and she scribbled something down. They popped open the van to rear doors. Inside, under a tarp, was another car, a small silver Stetson, paint scratched up, windshield cracked. The front bumper was gone, and the steering column was broken. It looked like it had been hot-wired. My chest tightened. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. This wasn't a normal car wash. She waved the guys off after a few minutes, then motioned for me to follow her to the office. It was a cramped room with peeling wallpaper and a flickering fluorescent light. Papers, tools, and spray bottles covered every surface. She told me to sit, said she just needed to finish some quick paperwork. While she typed, I could hear faint static from a radio somewhere in the room. It wasn't music, just voices, low and distant. I realized it was a scanner, the kind police use. The voices were saying codes I didn't understand, numbers and directions. Then I heard it clearly. Something about an ongoing investigation involving a stolen car ring operating out of a vehicle cleaning business on Riverside. That was this place. I froze. She must have heard it too because she stopped typing mid-word. Her eyes darted toward the radio, then toward the garage. She muttered something under her breath and reached for her phone. Before she could make a call, flashing blue and red lights flooded through the office window. Loud voices echoed outside, police shouting commands, car doors slamming, engines rumbling. She looked straight at me, eyes wide, then grabbed my wrist hard and said we needed to leave. I pulled back instinctively, asking what was going on, but she didn't answer. She bolted for the back door, and I followed, mostly out of panic. We ran past the rows of cars, through a cloud of steam from one of the hoses still running. Outside, cops were already spreading across the lot, flashlights cutting through the mist. I ducked behind one of the trucks while she sprinted toward the fence. Before she made it halfway, a spotlight hit her. The officers shouted for her to stop. She froze for half a second, then dropped to her knees. Someone grabbed my arm from behind, yanked me out from behind the truck, and pushed me to the ground. My face hit the wet pavement. They cuffed me before I could even explain. I kept trying to say I didn't work there, that I'd just come with her, but they weren't listening. All they saw was another person running from the scene. They questioned me for hours at the station. I told him everything. How I'd met her, the dinner, the visit to the car wash, the van, and all of it. Turns out she'd been part of a group stealing cars, changing plates, cleaning them up, and reselling them under fake paperwork. The car wash was just a front. They used the noise and the water as cover to swap parts and hide evidence. She'd been on their radar for months. They just hadn't expected her to show up with someone new that night. When they finally let me go, it was almost morning. My clothes were damp, hands sore from the cuffs. They told me I was lucky I didn't run when she did, or they might have thought I was part of it too. Later that week, I saw her name in a small article online. Police had charged multiple people connected to the operation. She was one of them. Her mugshot didn't even look shocked, just tired, like she'd seen it coming. Sometimes when I drive past a car wash, the smell of soap and engine oil makes my stomach twist. I still think about how calm she was that night, how natural it all felt until the lights hit. She wasn't nervous, wasn't scared. She'd just been living two versions of herself, and I picked the wrong night to meet both. I met him through a friend's post. She'd commented on one of his videos and tagged me as a joke, saying he was my type. He was one of those small-time vloggers who filmed casual stuff, reviews, food trips, day-in-the-life kind of content. Nothing crazy. His account had a few thousand followers, nothing major, but he seemed funny in his clips, confident, kind of charming in a dorky way. We started messaging, and he asked if I wanted to go on what he called a fun little vlog date. He said it'd just be a small video for his channel, nothing serious, just something lighthearted. It didn't sound too bad. I'd seen couples do those kinds of videos online, mini dates, trying weird food, doing silly challenges. I figured it would just be that. I said yes. He picked me up on a Saturday afternoon in a small blue car with cameras mounted on the dash. I noticed them right away, but assumed they were just there from his usual vlogging stuff. He greeted me like he already knew me, said he planned the whole thing, bowling, dinner, and maybe a walk through the city after. At first, it was fine. He made jokes, talked a lot, told me about his channel and how he wanted to grow it into something bigger. He asked me if I'd ever thought about being in videos, said I had the right kind of energy. I laughed it off. When we got to the bowling alley, he opened his trunk and pulled out a small tripod. He said it was just for getting some shots of us bowling. I didn't really want to be filmed, but he said we could blur my face later. He set it up quickly, pointing it toward the lane, and started narrating what we were doing, talking to the camera like someone was watching live. I thought it was weird that he kept glancing at his phone, like checking for comments or something, but I assumed he was just monitoring his footage. He laughed randomly at times, responding to things I didn't hear. That's when I realized his phone wasn't just sitting idle. It was propped up against the ball rack, screen facing him. I caught a reflection of scrolling text on it. Comments. He wasn't filming. He was live. It took me a second to process it. My heart sped up, but I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to be sure. He kept up his energetic tone, pointing at the screen, waving a few times, saying they love you already. That confirmed it. I hadn't agreed to this. He was streaming everything, the bowling, the conversations, me. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to make a scene. I just played along for a bit, smiling awkwardly while he talked. When he went to get more tokens, I walked over to his phone. The chat was going wild. Hundreds of people commenting. Some were just saying normal stuff, but others were calling me names, speculating about who I was, some even posting weird references I didn't understand. The title of the stream read, First Date 2.0. Let's hope this one goes better. That line hit me hard. This one. When he came back, I asked him quietly what that meant. He brushed it off, said it was just an inside joke from a previous stream. I tried to laugh along, but something in his eyes felt off. There was this twitch when I brought it up, like he didn't want to talk about it at all. After we finished bowling, he said we should grab dinner nearby. I told him I was kind of tired, but he insisted, saying people were loving the chemistry and that we had to give them a proper ending. He said it like it wasn't even a real date anymore, just a video that needed finishing. We went to the small diner down the street. He picked a table by the window and set his phone up again, facing both of us this time. I told him straight up that I didn't want to be on camera. He smiled like it was cute and said he'd crop me out later. I asked if it was live, and he said no, but the way he kept looking at his phone every few seconds told a different story. I looked around and noticed a few people at other tables glancing our way. One of them, sitting alone near the corner, kept his phone in his hand, typing fast. Another one whispered something to the waitress, who then disappeared into the kitchen. I didn't understand what was going on yet, but the air felt heavy. Then, out of nowhere, 2 police cars pulled up outside. Lights flashing, engines still running. My stomach dropped. The diner went quiet, except for the hum of the lights outside. The door swung open, and 2 officers walked straight toward our table. He froze mid-sentence, staring at them with this blank, almost annoyed look. It told him to keep his hands where they could see them. He tried to talk his way out of it, saying he was just filming content, that there'd been some mistake. But the officers didn't care. They told him to step away from the table, then cuffed him right there while the whole diner stared. One of the officers grabbed his phone, still streaming, still recording comments that were flooding in like wildfire. Someone finally turned it off. I just sat there silent, completely stunned. The waitress came over, asked if I was okay, then told me quietly that the police had been looking for him all week. Apparently, during one of his previous dates, he'd live-streamed the entire thing and things had gone bad. He'd been accused of assaulting the girl on camera right before cutting the stream. The viewers had reported it, but by the time police traced his account, he disappeared. They've been tracking his handle, waiting for him to go live again. That First Date 2.0 title wasn't a joke. It was a sequel. I had to go down to the station to give a statement. They told me it'd shown up in his live stream without consent, that he'd been using fake dating profiles to lure women for content. He built a small following that liked watching these raw dates, half prank, half reality. But no one knew what had actually happened during the last one until after the video went dark. They found the girl later in another city. She was fine, but she refused to talk about what happened on camera. His channel had since been flagged and banned, but he made new ones under different names, each time pulling in more followers who thought it was all entertainment. I don't even remember driving home that night. My phone kept buzzing from random numbers, probably people who had seen the lib before it went down. I deleted every social media account for a while after that. Sometimes I still get tagged in random videos by strangers. Reposts of that stream, my face blurred, but my voice still there. Just laughing awkwardly in a bowling alley, unaware that thousands of people were watching.